There are nights along the Missouri River when the fog rolls in so thick it feels like the world has been wrapped in wet cotton. You hear only what the river allows. You see only what it decides to show you. And on those nights, even a man with a badge and a gun can feel like nothing more than a fragile breath against something older and deeper than the land itself. The night it happened, I remember thinking the fog looked unnatural. Not just heavy, but alive somehow. It moved in slow coils across the bridge, drifting around the guardrails and swallowing the headlights from our cruiser until the beams became nothing but pale, ghostly lines. My deputy, Cole, sat beside me. He was younger than me, sharp and steady, but I could see the strain around his eyes as we drove across the old steel bridge that connected our side of town to the farmlands to the west. Water roared beneath us, though we could not see it. The fog made the sound feel deeper, like a heartbeat hidden under the earth. Cole muttered under his breath, "I hate nights like this." I did not disagree. I pulled the cruiser into a slow crawl, tires humming softly on the metal grating. The radio crackled with faint static but no real transmissions. The world felt muffled. Then something moved. At first it was only a shadow, a darker smear in the fog, a brief interruption in the gray curtain. But it was large. Much larger than any deer or stray livestock. It crossed the road ahead of us in a slow, deliberate motion. Cole straightened at once. "There. Did you see that?" I nodded and reached for the spotlight switch. But before my finger touched it, the shadow moved again. This time it stopped, dead center on the bridge. The fog drifted just enough to outline a shape. Tall, broad, bent slightly forward as if studying something on the ground. And then it lifted its head. Two faint glimmers caught the cruiser's headlights. "Eyes," Cole whispered. "Sheriff, what is that?" I opened my door slowly. "Stay inside." He ignored me and stepped out behind me, gun already raised. The fog swirled around our legs, cool and damp. My breath fogged in front of me in slow bursts. We approached carefully. The shape did not move. Then the wind shifted. The fog thinned just enough to give us a clearer view. It was not a man. Not any man I had ever seen. His shoulders were too wide. His arms too long. His head too narrow and elongated. And the skin that clung to its shape looked wet, as if it had crawled out of the river moments before. Cole reacted first. "Sheriff, I am taking the shot." I put out a hand to stop him, but it was too late. He fired. The shot tore through the fog with a crack that echoed down both sides of the river. I saw the impact. The creature jerked backward and staggered. But it did not fall. It straightened. Slowly. Unnaturally slowly. As if gravity meant nothing to it. His head turned toward us. Not like a person turns. Not with muscles or joints. But in a single smooth movement, the way an animal might turn when it senses prey. Cole stepped back. "What in the hell?" Then it spoke. The sound came from its chest first. A low rumble like river rocks grinding together. Then it rose, stretched, sharpened until a single word formed. A name. My daughter's name. Spoken clearly. Spoken correctly. Spoken by something that had no right to know she existed. I froze. My blood turned to ice. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to shield myself, to reach for anything that might make sense of what I had just heard. But all I could do was stand there, staring at the thing that had taken a bullet and stayed standing. Cole's gun shook in his hands. "Sheriff, it knows you. It knows your family." The creature tilted its head. Then it stepped backward once, twice, and dissolved. Not fell, not ran, dissolved. As if the fog consumed it. As if it had been made from the fog all along. We ran forward instinctively, trying to see where it went, but the fog swallowed everything. The bridge ahead was empty. The air was silent except for the river below. No footprints, no blood, no sound. Cole's voice trembled beside me. "Sheriff, what the hell did we just see?" I did not answer, because in that moment, with the fog closing in around us and the river roaring beneath our feet, one truth cut through me like cold steel. Whatever that thing was, whatever it wanted, it did not fire back, it did not attack, it did not need to. It spoke my daughter's name, and that was worse than anything it could have done. I barely remember driving back from the bridge that night. The cruiser seemed to float instead of roll, the fog brushing against the windows like slow-moving fingers. Cole sat rigid beside me, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I could hear the faint grind of his teeth. Neither of us spoke until the bridge lights vanished behind the haze. When we reached the station, the parking lot lamps flickered in the damp air. The building looked small, almost fragile, like a lone matchbox waiting for a spark to devour it. I killed the engine and sat there with my keys still in the ignition, unable to move. Cole finally spoke. "Sheriff," said her name. The words felt like a fist pressed against my throat. I stepped out into the night, my boots crunching against gravel, and for a moment the cold wind carried a faint echo of the river, the kind of smell that clings to wet rocks and old wood. I felt watched, not by the station, not by Cole, by something else, something that moved under the thick blanket of fog along the Missouri River. Inside, the station lights hummed softly, familiar, warm, but the comfort they once offered was gone. Now they only highlighted how exposed we truly were. I walked to my office, shut the door, and lowered myself into the chair. My hands shook so badly I had to clench them together until the tremors stopped. I stared at the family photo on my desk. My daughter smiling with missing teeth, hair tied up with ribbons. She was only 8 then, innocent, unaware of anything the river might be hiding. My voice cracked inside the empty room. How did it know her name? The question twisted through me like barbed wire. I tried to ground myself in logic, in reason. A stranger hidden in the fog. A trick of the mind. Coincidence. But I had seen the bullet hit. I had watched the creature rise. And I had felt the air shift when it spoke. This was no stranger. No man. No coincidence. Something from the river had spoken my daughter's name. I checked the old case files that same night. Unsolved drownings. Strange disappearances. Reports from fishermen who swore they saw tall shapes moving along the riverbank. One mentioned hearing voices. Another described something watching from the shallows. Most were brushed off as drunks or men who had stayed out too long under the sun. But patterns surfaced the longer I read. Sightings always happened on fog-heavy nights. Footprints appeared on the riverbanks after storms. Livestock went missing near the bridge. Children reported nightmares of something standing near their windows. And none of these reports had ever been properly followed up. Because no one believed them. Cole knocked on my door. He looked worse than before, like the color had drained from his skin. "Sheriff, you need to see this." We walked back outside into the thinning fog. The air was cold, but still. Too still. Cole led me past the station toward the edge of the river path that cut behind the building. He pointed to the ground. I felt my stomach drop. There were tracks in the dirt, crushed grass, pressed mud, but not shaped like boots or hooves. Long, deep, almost webbed, and each impression was spaced too far apart for any human stride. The tracks led toward the river, then stopped abruptly at the waterline. Cole swallowed. Whatever it was, it came here, followed us back. A chill settled over my shoulders. I looked out across the dark water. Ripples moved across the surface despite the still air. I whispered, "It is tracking me." Cole turned toward me, eyes wide with fear. "Sheriff, what if it wants your daughter?" The thought hit me like a blow. My chest tightened. My legs weakened. I forced myself to breathe slowly, grounding myself in the cold night air. But the truth hung between us like a weight too heavy to lift. If it knew her name, it knew where I lived. It knew how to find her. And I had brought that horror with me by stepping off that bridge. That night I drove home slowly, headlights cutting through the thinning mist. The gravel shifted under my tires as I pulled into the driveway. The porch light cast a warm glow across the yard, but even that comfort felt fragile. I scanned the yard, the trees, the shadows of the old barn at the property edge. The silence felt wrong. Inside, my daughter slept peacefully in her small bed, her stuffed animal tucked under one arm. I brushed her hair from her forehead and tried to steady my breathing. I whispered softly, "You are safe. I promise." But the promise tasted like ash in my mouth. I stayed awake on the couch that night, gun in my lap, watching the windows until the sky faded into morning gray. When dawn broke, the fog had sunk back into the river. Birds returned to the treetops. Life resumed its normal rhythm. But something else had changed. On the far side of my porch, etched lightly into the dew, were 3 long impressions. Not letters, not symbols, finger marks, thin, deliberate, as if something had rested its hand there while watching the house through the window where my daughter slept. My throat tightened. My world had shifted in the span of one night. My duty as sheriff no longer mattered. I was a father first, and something in the river had learned her name. There are moments when fear stops being a sharp jolt to the system and becomes something else. Something slower, heavier, a constant pressure that settles into the lungs and refuses to leave. By the time the 3rd night came after the bridge incident, that pressure had become my shadow. It followed me from room to room. It sat beside me in the cruiser. It stood behind me in the station whenever I looked into the dark corners. But worst of all, it waited for me at home. I started checking every door at least 3 times. Every window, every lock. I set alarms and double-checked them. I slept, when I managed to sleep at all, with my gun on my chest and my boots still on. Cole noticed the change. Every morning he showed up earlier than he needed to, as if staying close to me was the only way he could steady himself. On the 3rd evening, he sat across from my desk with a blank, haunted stare. "Sheriff, it is not gone." I looked up slowly. "What makes you say that?" He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. "I found something when I drove past your road this morning." He slid the phone toward me. My stomach tightened the moment I saw the image. The riverbank behind my property. My fence. And written in the dirt, long and smooth, were letters. 3 letters. My daughter's initials. Large, precise, fresh. I forced air into my lungs. "You think it came onto the property?" "Sheriff, it was not just on the property. It was close. Too close. It was watching." His voice broke on the last word. I leaned back slowly. The chair creaked under my weight, the sound far too loud in the quiet office. The truth had already become impossible to deny. The creature was not simply stalking. It was communicating, choosing moments, leaving signs that were unmistakably intentional. But nothing prepared me for what came next. That same night, after the station closed and the deputies went home, I gathered every old report I could find about the river. I found stories dating back generations. Stories told by families that lived near the water for longer than the town itself had existed. Stories of a thing that mimicked voices. Stories of a thing that watched families. Stories of children waking in the night to hear their own names whispered from outside. Some described a tall, dark shape moving along the riverbank, standing perfectly still for hours. Others spoke of wounds that did not bleed normally. A few mentioned voices spoken in tones no human throat could produce. I read until my hands shook. By the time I left the station, it was past midnight. The night air carried a thick chill, the kind that sinks deep into your bones. The road home was silent, and the fields on either side seemed too still. The moon was a dull white disk behind a veil of thin clouds. When I reached my driveway, the porch light flickered. I froze. Then I saw something that made my breath stop entirely. My daughter's bedroom window was open, just slightly, barely an inch, but it had been closed when I left the house. I almost dropped my keys rushing to unlock the door. My footsteps pounded against the floorboards as I ran down the hallway. I burst into her room with my gun raised. She lay in bed, fast asleep. Her small chest rose and fell in steady breaths. Her hair spilled across the pillow in soft curls. Her stuffed bear lay tucked beneath her arm. Nothing seemed disturbed, until I looked at the floor. There, just beneath the window, was a wet mark on the wood. A small, dark smear of moisture. I crouched down, heart hammering, and touched it with the tip of my finger. Cold, thick, not water. I wiped it onto a tissue and held it to the light. River sludge. I stood slowly and closed the window. My hands shook so badly I could barely lock it. Behind me, a soft sound drifted across the room. My daughter stirred. "Daddy." I froze. She had not opened her eyes. She had not rolled over. Her voice was calm, sleepy. "Yes, baby," I whispered. She did not respond. But then she spoke again, softer this time. "Daddy, tell it to leave." My skin prickled. My breath caught. I stepped toward her bed. "Tell what to leave." She frowned slightly, eyes still closed. "The tall thing by the river." I sank to my knees beside her bed. "Baby, did you see something?" She shook her head. "Not tonight. Last night. Talked funny." My throat tightened painfully. "What did it say?" She whispered. "My name." I sat there until the sun began to rise, unable to move, listening to every distant sound, every crack of the old house settling, every shift of wind against the siding. The next morning I brought her to my sister's home 2 towns over without explanation. I told her I needed to handle something important. I told her I would be back soon. But the look in her eyes told me she knew something was wrong. When I returned to the house, Cole was waiting on the porch. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and guilt. "Sheriff, you need to come with me. There is something on the riverbank." We drove in silence toward the bridge, neither of us saying what we already understood. Whatever this creature was, it did not pick me at random. It knew my daughter's name. It left marks near my home. It stood outside her window, and now it wanted us by the river again. The moment we stepped onto the riverbank, the wind died. The rustling leaves fell silent. Even the water seemed to hesitate. Cole pointed toward the rocks. "Sheriff, listen." At first I heard nothing. Then a whisper rose from the fog. Soft, slow, painfully familiar. My daughter's name, spoken in the same tone I used when I tucked her in at night. Cole backed away. "It is copying you." I stepped forward, breath unsteady. The whisper came again, this time from the water, then from the trees, then from behind us. I spun, gun raised, but there was no shape, no shadow, no footprints. Just that voice. My daughter's name, spoken over and over, from every direction. Cole grabbed my arm. "Sheriff, we need to get out of here, now." But I could not move. My legs felt rooted to the earth. Something was staring back at me through the fog. I saw it then, just barely. A tall figure standing in the mist near the bridge support. Still, silent, watching. And when the wind picked up, when the fog shifted just enough, I saw movement across its chest. A bullet wound. The same one Cole had inflicted. Still open, but still not bleeding. It lifted its head and whispered my daughter's name one more time. This time the voice was not mimicked. It was directed at me. I stumbled back, almost tripping over the rocks. Cole raised his gun. The creature sank into the fog. Gone. Leaving only the river's roar and that terrible echo in my mind. I whispered to myself, "Why her?" And as if answering me from the fog, the creature's voice rose a final time. "Not her. You." The wind carried the words away. The fog hid the creature. But the message remained. I was not protecting her from it. It was revealing her to me. And it was not done yet. I used to think the river was just water and mud and old stories people whispered on porches when the nights grew long. But after that morning on the riverbank, I understood something I had never wanted to face. The river was watching me. Not the way a person watches with curiosity or caution. No, the way a predator watches prey. Quiet, patient, constant. Cole and I drove back toward town without speaking. The tires crackled on gravel. The fog thinned behind us, but its weight stayed in the cruiser like a second passenger, heavy and unwelcome. Cole gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bone white. He finally broke the silence. "Sheriff, what does it want from you?" I watched the land blur past the window. Dry cornfields shifting in the wind. Patches of tall grass swaying in strange patterns. A farmhouse with its windows boarded from years of disuse. I answered softly, "I do not know." But I did know, or I had begun to understand. Whatever had crawled out of the fog on that bridge had not chosen me at random. It had not spoken my daughter's name to frighten me. It had spoken her name to reach me. And every hour since, it had been getting closer. Back at the station, the other deputies noticed something was wrong. They whispered to each other in the hallways, gave me strange looks, and avoided the windows that faced the river. Word traveled fast in a small town, even faster when fear was involved. By sundown, most of the town knew some kind of creature had been seen on the bridge. People claimed they heard something calling from the river that afternoon. Someone swore they saw a tall dark figure pacing the waterline near the old mill. Fear had started to spread. But fear was nothing compared to what was happening inside me. I could not stop hearing my daughter's name in that twisted voice. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the creature standing there on the bridge, lifting its head with that impossible slow movement and speaking her name like it had already claimed it. By nightfall, I left the station and drove straight back to the river. I told myself it was to gather evidence, to prove something, to protect the town. But deep down I knew why I returned. Part of me believed the creature had chosen that place for a reason. The bridge, the water, the fog. As if those things were pieces of a story that belonged to the river long before I ever patrolled its edges. The headlights of my cruiser cut through the darkness, reflecting off the steel beams of the bridge. The fog was thicker again, rolling low across the asphalt and curling around the guardrails like white fingers. I stepped out, the metal groaning beneath my boots. The night air was freezing, colder than any early autumn night should have been. My voice felt tiny when I spoke. I know you are here. The fog stirred. A long, low ripple moved across the river below. I walked to the railing, heart hammering against my ribs. The current beneath the bridge slithered in slow spirals instead of flowing straight. Something huge passed underneath the surface, disturbing the water just enough to make the ripples rise almost like breath. The fog thickened until I could not see the far end of the bridge. Then I heard it. Not from the water, not from the fog. From behind me, my daughter's name, spoken softly, almost tenderly. I turned, gun raised, breath shallow. Nothing. Only fog. Nothing else. I stepped back, scanning every shadow. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Every instinct screamed that I was not alone. Then something flickered in the reflection of my cruiser's window. I froze. In the glass, I saw the faint outline of a tall figure standing behind me on the bridge. I spun. The bridge was empty, but the reflection had been so clear, so precise. A silhouette too tall to be human. Too narrow. Too wrong. I looked back at the cruiser window. The silhouette was still there. Now closer. Now leaning forward. Now raising its head. It whispered again. My daughter's name. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged the glass as I stepped closer. My own reflection wavered in the window, distorted by the fog and the trembling in my hands. I whispered, "What are you?" The silhouette answered. Not in English. Not in any language I had ever heard. A wet, gurgling tone rose from the glass itself. Then the silhouette lifted something, its hand, and dragged its fingers down the inside of the reflection. Black lines streaked down the glass. Not on the outside. On the image itself. I scrambled back, heart pounding so violently I felt sick. The lines remained. 3 dark trails running down the reflection of the cruiser window. But when I touched the glass from the outside, it was clean. Completely clean. Something in me broke a little then. I whispered to the darkness. Why her? The fog shifted. A shape moved near the railing on the far side of the bridge. The same tall, narrow outline I had seen in the reflection. It stood unnaturally still, arms hanging at an angle that made my skin crawl. And then, without sound, without movement, it vanished. The fog swallowed it like it had never existed. But one thing remained. A voice. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. Not her. You. The words echoed across the steel beams, sliding under my skin like ice water. In that moment, watching the fog writhe around the bridge like living smoke, I understood the terrible truth. It was not threatening my daughter. It was using her name to reach me, because it wanted me to listen. It wanted me to follow. It wanted me to understand something I was not ready to know. I staggered back toward the cruiser, breath coming in ragged bursts. Cole's voice echoed in my memory. "Sheriff, it is after you." I climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands shook so violently I could barely turn the key. I drove away, unable to stop looking at the rearview mirror. Because even as the bridge faded into darkness and the fog thinned into the night air, I kept seeing that silhouette standing behind me. Not on the bridge. Not in the reflection. In my memory, like it had etched itself into me. That night I understood something I had never wished to learn. You do not choose a creature like that. Chooses you. And once it does, you belong to the river. It does not matter where you hide. I never told anyone the full truth about what happened on that bridge. Not Cole. Not the deputies. Not my daughter. And certainly not the people in town who still ask questions whenever the fog rolls in thicker than usual. They think the fear in my eyes is the weight of the badge. They think the worn lines on my face come from years of night shifts and paperwork and old cases that never quite closed. They do not know the real reason. They do not know that something out there whispered my daughter's name in a voice that did not belong to any living thing. They do not know that the more I tried to forget, the more clearly I felt its presence waiting at the edges of places where the river bends and the fog nestles against the water like a sleeping animal. They do not know that I have seen it since. Many times. After that night, I doubled my patrols near the river. Some part of me hoped I would see it again so I could face it. Another part of me hoped I never would, because facing it meant knowing what it truly was. And that knowledge sits heavy on a man. Heavy enough to break him. Cole left the force 6 months after the bridge incident. He never said the reason. He did not need to. I saw the terror in him every time he passed the riverbank. I saw the way he flinched when someone spoke my daughter's name. He was never the same man after hearing her name come from something that was not human. As for me, I stayed. But I stopped pretending. The badge felt lighter in my hand, but heavier on my soul. I patrolled the roads because that was my duty, but I looked at every shadow like it was something alive. I watched the tree lean at dusk as if the branches themselves were breathing. In the years that followed, the incidents changed shape but never stopped. Animals found on porches with no tracks leading to them. Fog rising on clear nights. Windows creaking open though they were locked. Voices carried by the river. Whispers so faint they might have been imagination, except they always said the same thing. My badge number. Sometimes it was spoken in my own voice. Sometimes in that twisted, stretched tone I heard the night it first appeared. Once it sounded exactly like my daughter. That was the night I finally broke. I remember standing in the living room long after everyone had fallen asleep. My daughter was upstairs breathing softly in the safety of her room. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the river fog crawling up from the woods behind the yard. Then, from the window where the curtains were slightly open, I heard it through the glass. Her voice, calling me by my badge number. Calling me the way she used to call me inside the house when she was 5 years old and woke up from a nightmare. Except she was asleep, and the voice came from outside, right at the edge of the yard, right where the river fog met the grass. I walked to the window, but I could not bring myself to look out. Something in me knew that whatever stood there was not her. And if I looked directly at it, if I met its eyes, it would be the end of whatever part of me still believed the world made sense. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room chair, my gun resting in my hands, my body frozen in place. By dawn the voice was gone, but the fear stayed. The next day I filed a report about trespassing near the house. I wrote something vague, something procedural. Nothing about the voice. Nothing about my daughter's name. Nothing about the way the fog curled against the porch as if something large had been standing there. Even in silence, I could feel that presence. Watching, waiting, learning. I think that is what frightened me most. Not that the creature existed. Not that it knew my daughter's name. But that it was becoming smarter. More focused. More aware of me. More connected. Years passed. My daughter grew up. I kept the truth locked behind the kind of silence only a terrified father can maintain. The creature did not appear as often, but it never stayed gone long enough for me to breathe easy. Some nights, when the moon brightened the fog in a way that made the world look washed and pale, I felt a familiar presence near the river. Watching, tall, quiet, waiting. I never told anyone. Not because I feared they would not believe me, but because I feared they would. And if they believed me, they would ask questions I could not answer. Questions that would force me to admit something I still do not understand. Something that has haunted every breath since the night on the bridge. Why did it speak her name? Why did it choose me? And why, after all these years, does it still return when the fog is thick and the river pulls at the banks as if reaching out? Tonight, I set this recorder on my desk because I can feel the river calling again. The windows are rattling softly, and the fog is rising in slow waves up the road. I can hear the same soft whispering outside. It has not changed. It has not weakened. It has not forgotten. My daughter is safe. She always has been, because the creature never came for her. Came for me. And now that I understand that, I finally see the truth I have been running from since the night Cole fired at something on the bridge. The creature did not speak her name to threaten her. It spoke her name to reach inside me, to anchor itself in my life, to mark me, and I realized something else. Something I should have understood in that first moment when it stood up from the road and looked directly at me. It was never running away from the shot. It was running toward me. It wanted me, and it still does. I end this confession with the words that have lived in the back of my skull since that fog-soaked night on the Missouri River. The night everything changed. My deputy shot a creature on the bridge. It did not fall. It stood up, spoke her name, and from that moment on, I knew it was not her it wanted. It was me.